January 15th, 2014. Rancho Mirage, California. The desert sun cast long shadows across marble floors as silence filled a bathroom where dreams came to die. In the pristine white bathtub, motionless beneath cold water, lay Cassandra Lynn Hensley. Miss February 2006, the golden-haired muse whose image had adorned bedroom walls from Tokyo to Tennessee, whose blue eyes had hypnotized millions through glossy magazine pages. At 34, the woman who had once embodied every man's fantasy was found floating like a fallen angel, her signature blonde hair spreading across the water's surface like liquid gold turned to lead. The same bathtub that should have been sanctuary had become a tomb. The woman who had spent years perfecting the art of being desired had died utterly, devastatingly alone. This was Cassandra Lynn Hensley, the small-town Utah hairstylist who transformed herself into a global Playboy icon, only to discover that becoming the world's fantasy meant losing herself entirely. The official cause would be listed as accidental drowning, complicated by prescription drug intoxication. But in the glittering, shadowy empire of Playboy glamour, nothing was ever quite that simple. The shockwaves reverberated around the world when news broke. Here was Miss February 2006, whose centerfold had shattered download records and whose image had become synonymous with Playboy's vision of American beauty. She had been the embodiment of Hugh Hefner's ultimate fantasy, blonde, blue-eyed, with a smile that seemed to promise everything while revealing nothing of the woman beneath. Within hours of the announcement, her photographs were being shared millions of times across social media platforms. Fans from every continent posted tributes, many admitting they had kept her centerfold images saved on their devices for years. The irony was devastating. In death, Cassandra was receiving more attention and adoration than she had experienced in her final years of isolation and struggle. The circumstances surrounding her death raised immediate questions. Why was she alone in a friend's house rather than her own home? What had driven this seemingly successful woman to rely so heavily on prescription medications that they became her final companions? In her final social media post just days before her death, Cassandra had written words that now seem prophetic. "It's hard to be a dream for others when you're a nightmare for yourself." The post had received thousands of likes and hearts. But how many had truly understood the cry for help hidden within those carefully chosen words? Friends would later reveal that Cassandra had been reaching out in subtle ways for months, making comments about feeling trapped in someone else's life and wondering if anyone would miss the real her if she disappeared. Was this really just an accident? Or was it the inevitable conclusion of a system that creates goddesses only to abandon them when the spotlight moves on? But to understand how Cassandra Lynn Hensley became both fantasy and cautionary tale, we must first understand how it all began in the windswept valleys of conservative Utah, where dreams seemed as distant as the snow-capped peaks. In the conservative heartland of Utah, where Mormon values run deep and modesty is sacred doctrine, Cassandra Lynn was born on December 15, 1979, into a world that would seem incomprehensible to those who knew her only as a Playboy icon. The small city of Price, nestled in the Carbon County valleys, was a place where coal mining and traditional family values shaped every aspect of daily life. Raised in a middle-class family that attended the local Mormon church religiously, young Cassandra grew up surrounded by teachings about virtue, the sanctity of the body, and preparation for a life of traditional domesticity. Her father worked in the mining industry. Her mother devoted herself to homemaking, and their daughter was expected to follow a well-worn path toward marriage and motherhood. But even as a child, there were signs that Cassandra possessed something extraordinary. Teachers noted her unusual beauty, those piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold depths beyond her years, the golden hair that caught sunlight like spun treasure, and a natural grace that made her stand out in any crowd. More intriguingly, she displayed an early fascination with transformation and beauty that went beyond typical childhood interests. The Mormon community in Price was tight-knit and traditional, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Cassandra's beauty was discussed in hushed tones at church gatherings and community events. Elder wives would comment on how blessed the Hensley family was to have such a beautiful daughter, while simultaneously warning about the dangers that such beauty could bring to a young woman's spiritual development. While other children played with toys, Cassandra was drawn to her mother's makeup collection like a moth to flame. She would spend hours experimenting with colors and techniques, creating elaborate looks that suggested an artistic vision far beyond her age. Her creations weren't child's play. They were sophisticated experiments in transformation that revealed an intuitive understanding of light, shadow, and enhancement. Patricia Hensley often found her daughter in the bathroom at dawn, practicing different makeup techniques she had seen in magazines smuggled from friends whose families weren't as strict about secular publications. These early morning sessions became a source of both pride and concern for Cassandra's mother, who recognized her daughter's talent but worried about where such interests might lead in their conservative community. Her family noticed her unusual relationship with mirrors and cameras. Where most children were awkward when photographed, Cassandra seemed to understand instinctively how to present herself, how to find the light, how to create an image. It was as if she possessed an innate understanding of visual representation, a skill that would later prove both her greatest asset and perhaps her ultimate curse. The conservative environment created a fascinating tension within young Cassandra. She was taught to view the body as sacred and to dress modestly, yet she was acutely aware of her own beauty and its effect on others. She noticed how adults spoke to her differently, how she could command attention simply by walking into a room. This early awareness of her power created a complex relationship with her own identity. Friends from childhood would later recall Cassandra as someone who seemed to be performing even in casual moments, as if always aware of being observed. Yet beneath this performative quality lay genuine warmth and intelligence that drew people to her. Could their early childhood experiences have laid the foundation for later triumphs or tragedies? In Cassandra's case, the same qualities that made her magnetic as a child, her beauty, her understanding of image, her ability to transform herself, would later propel her to international fame while establishing the tensions between expectation and reality that would define her entire adult life. The transition from childhood to adolescence in conservative Utah proved to be a crucible for Cassandra Lynn. As her beauty became impossible to ignore, she found herself navigating increasingly complex social dynamics. The same Mormon community that had cherished her as a beautiful child began to view her emerging sexuality with a mixture of fascination and concern. High school brought new challenges and revelations. Cassandra excelled academically, but it was her involvement in theater and local beauty competitions that truly captured her imagination. She discovered that she possessed not just natural beauty, but also the discipline and artistic vision necessary to transform that beauty into something transcendent. The drama teacher, Mrs. Rebecca Anderson, became one of the first adults outside her family to recognize Cassandra's potential. During production of the school's spring musical, Mrs. Anderson watched in amazement as Cassandra transformed herself for different roles, not just through costume changes, but through subtle alterations in makeup and posture that created entirely different personas. She had this uncanny ability to become someone else, Mrs. Anderson would later recall. But what struck me most was that she seemed more comfortable being these other characters than being herself. Even at 17, there was something melancholy about her when she wasn't performing. Her participation in pageants created the first real friction with her family's values. While her parents were proud of her success, They worried about the attention she was receiving and the changes in their daughter's personality. The innocent girl who had once played with makeup for fun was becoming a young woman who understood the power that beauty could wield. The local pageant circuit was small but competitive, featuring girls from across southern Utah who dreamed of bigger stages. Cassandra quickly established herself as a formidable competitor, winning titles that came with small cash prizes and scholarship opportunities. More importantly, she was building a network of contacts in the beauty and entertainment industries that would prove crucial in her later career. The pageant circuit in Utah provided Cassandra with her first taste of real competition and professional standards. She learned to walk in heels, to project confidence when nervous, and to answer interview questions with poise that belied her teenage years. More importantly, she learned that success required not just beauty but intelligence, strategy, and ruthless dedication to perfection. But success in local competitions couldn't satisfy Cassandra's growing ambitions. She began to dream of a world beyond Utah's borders, creating increasing friction at home where her family worried about the direction her interests were taking. After graduating high school with honors, Cassandra made a pragmatic decision to enroll in cosmetology school rather than pursuing traditional college education. The beauty industry offered a compromise between her creative ambitions and the need for financial independence. Her years as a hairstylist and makeup artist in Utah salons provided crucial education in beauty creation. Working with everyday clients, Cassandra learned not just how to enhance natural features, but how to create entirely new personas through skilled application of cosmetics and styling. More importantly, she learned to read people with intuitive accuracy, understanding what image they wanted to project and what insecurities they were hiding. The work was satisfying, but Cassandra couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for something more significant. During evenings, she began building a professional portfolio, using her technical skills to create stunning self-portraits that showcased her versatility and sophisticated understanding of light and composition. The breakthrough came through a combination of ambition and serendipity. After receiving the usual rejections from modeling agencies, a talent scout who had seen her portfolio reached out about opportunities with publications specializing in glamour photography. The conversation was delicate, but the implication was clear. There were opportunities for a woman of her particular look in a more provocative arena. The decision to pose for Playboy was not made lightly. Cassandra understood that crossing that threshold would fundamentally alter not just her career trajectory, but her entire identity. In conservative Utah, such a choice would be scandalous, potentially severing ties with family and community. Yet the opportunity represented everything she had been working toward, a chance to transform her beauty into real success. Was the success they achieved truly worth all the pain they endured? For Cassandra, standing at that crucial crossroads, the question would remain unanswered until the very end. The photo shoot that would transform Cassandra Lynn from Utah hairstylist to international icon took place in the legendary Playboy studio in Los Angeles. Walking into that studio for the first time, Cassandra carried with her not just years of technical training, but also the weight of every compromise that had brought her to this moment. The studio itself was a temple to American sexuality, its walls lined with portraits of women who had achieved immortality through the lens of Playboy's photographers. Marilyn Monroe smiled eternally from vintage prints, while more recent playmates gazed out with the confident sexuality that had made them household names. Cassandra studied these images as she prepared for her own shoot, trying to understand the indefinable quality that separated the merely beautiful from the truly iconic. Under the guidance of photographers who had perfected the art of creating desire through imagery, Cassandra discovered new dimensions of her own appeal. The camera loved her in ways that went beyond mere physical beauty. There was something in her eyes, a combination of vulnerability and confidence, innocence and sophistication that translated into pure magic on film. The lead photographer, a veteran of dozens of Playmate shoots, would later describe working with Cassandra as effortless magic. She understood lighting instinctively, could read the photographer's intentions before they were spoken, and possessed a natural ability to convey emotion through subtle changes in expression. The technical crew, typically jaded by their exposure to beautiful women, found themselves genuinely impressed by her professionalism and natural talent. What made Cassandra's images particularly compelling was how they captured the essential contradiction of the Playboy ideal, the girl next door who was also unattainably perfect. Her Mormon upbringing, rather than being a liability, became the secret ingredient that made her irresistible. She embodied the fantasy of corruption and purity existing simultaneously. The wardrobe team had prepared multiple outfit changes, from casual sundresses to elegant evening wear to the minimal styling typical of Playboy's aesthetic. But it was in the moments between official shots, when Cassandra thought the cameras weren't rolling, that some of the most powerful images were captured. These candid moments revealed a natural sensuality that couldn't be manufactured or directed. Her professional background allowed her to collaborate with photographers as a true partner rather than simply a subject. She could anticipate what the camera needed, adjust her positioning to create exactly the mood required. This competence, combined with her natural beauty, created images that were both technically perfect and emotionally resonant. When Playboy selected Cassandra as Miss February 2006, they weren't just choosing a beautiful woman, they were investing in a carefully crafted fantasy that would resonate with millions. The centerfold spread featuring Cassandra became one of the most downloaded in Playboy's digital history, establishing her as a genuine cultural phenomenon. The success was intoxicating. Suddenly, Cassandra found herself catapulted into a world of luxury and celebrity that exceeded her wildest dreams. There were photo shoots in exotic locations, appearances at exclusive parties, and financial compensation that allowed her to live on her own terms for the first time. But success at this level came with prices that weren't immediately apparent. The same images that made Cassandra famous also defined the boundaries of her identity in increasingly restrictive ways. She discovered that being a Playboy playmate wasn't just a career choice, it was a lifestyle, a permanent role she was expected to inhabit 24 hours a day. The contracts she had signed were more comprehensive than she had initially understood. Beyond the photo shoots and appearances, there were expectations about her behavior in public, restrictions on what other projects she could pursue, and a complex web of image rights that meant her likeness could be used in ways she hadn't anticipated. The legal documents, written in language that protected Playboy's interests above all else, effectively made her a brand rather than a person. The pressure to maintain the fantasy was relentless. Every public appearance required perfect grooming, perfect behavior, and perfect representation of the Playboy brand. Cassandra found herself living in a state of constant performance, never able to simply be herself without consideration of how it might affect her image. The Playboy mansion parties, which seemed glamorous from the outside, became exercises in endurance. Cassandra would spend hours preparing her appearance only to spend the evening smiling for photographs, with men who saw her as a living embodiment of their fantasies rather than as a human being with her own thoughts and feelings. The conversations were often superficial or inappropriate, and she learned to deflect unwanted advances while maintaining the friendly, approachable persona that was part of her professional obligation. Hugh Hefner himself was a complex figure in Cassandra's experience. Publicly charming and seemingly supportive of his girls, he maintained a paternal facade that masked a business relationship built on the commodification of female sexuality. Private conversations with Hefner often felt like performance reviews, where Cassandra's value was measured by her ability to generate publicity and maintain the Playboy image rather than by her qualities as a human being. Behind all that glamour, was there an unbearable loneliness that nobody saw? Friends who knew Cassandra during this period would later describe a woman who seemed to be drowning in her own success, struggling to maintain connections with anything real while living in a world built entirely on fantasy. The isolation was perhaps the most unexpected consequence of her fame. While millions of men fantasized about her, genuine intimacy became increasingly elusive. How could she trust anyone's interest when her image was so overwhelmingly powerful? Every relationship became suspect, every friendship potentially transactional. Most troubling was the gradual erosion of her sense of self. The techniques of transformation that had once been tools for artistic expression became weapons turned against her own authenticity. She began to lose track of where the performance ended and the real Cassandra began. The descent from Playboy playmate to tabloid cautionary tale began subtly, with small compromises and minor scandals that individually seemed insignificant, but collectively painted a picture of a woman struggling to maintain control over her own narrative. The same media that had celebrated Cassandra's rise proved equally eager to document her fall. The first cracks appeared in her personal life. Cassandra's romantic relationships became increasingly turbulent, marked by patterns of intensity and disappointment. Partners entered her life drawn by the fantasy of being with a playmate, but few were prepared for the reality of loving a woman whose public image had become a burden rather than a blessing. The pressure of maintaining her appearance while aging in a youth-obsessed industry created additional stress. Every photograph became a potential source of anxiety, every public appearance a test of her ability to live up to impossible standards. The natural process of aging became a public spectacle subject to constant scrutiny. Financial pressures began to mount despite her earlier success. The Playboy modeling world offered great compensation for young women at their peak, but provided little long-term security. As newer, younger playmates captured the public's attention, Cassandra found herself competing not just against other women, but against her own younger self. The most devastating blow came through a series of legal and personal troubles that arrived all at once. A relationship with a troubled partner led to complications involving law enforcement, and suddenly Cassandra found herself in headlines for all the wrong reasons. The same media that had celebrated her beauty now focused obsessively on her struggles. The relationship that proved most destructive was with Marcus Chen, a photographer and aspiring filmmaker who entered her life during her peak fame years. Chen was charismatic and creative, claiming to understand the artistic side of her personality that had been buried under the commercial demands of her Playboy career. He promised to help her transition into more legitimate modeling and acting work. But his own struggles with addiction and financial problems soon dragged Cassandra into a world she was unprepared to navigate. The legal troubles began with a domestic disturbance call that resulted in both Cassandra and Chen being arrested. While the charges were eventually dropped, the arrest photos and police reports became public record, providing tabloid media with exactly the kind of scandal they craved. The images of Cassandra in handcuffs, her makeup smeared and her famous hair disheveled, created a stark contrast to her polished playmate persona. The incident marked a turning point in how the media covered Cassandra. Where once she had been portrayed as the wholesome beauty who had achieved the American dream, now she was cast as another celebrity cautionary tale. The narrative shift was swift and merciless, with former supporters distancing themselves and new enemies emerging to exploit her vulnerability. The public's reaction revealed the cruel mathematics of celebrity culture. The same audience that had elevated her to icon status proved equally eager to witness her destruction. Comment sections filled with vicious speculation about her mental state and worthiness of sympathy. The woman who had once been every man's fantasy was now fair game for every form of judgment and ridicule. Perhaps most painfully, some within the Playboy community distanced themselves from Cassandra as her troubles mounted. The organization that had built its fortune on her image proved reluctant to provide meaningful support when that image became inconvenient. Did this tragic event mark their downfall? Or was it simply the tipping point of deeper problems? For Cassandra, the public scandals were symptoms rather than causes of a more fundamental crisis. The real tragedy wasn't any single event, but the gradual erosion of her sense of self that had been occurring since she first stepped into the Playboy world. In the aftermath of her very public troubles, Cassandra Lynn faced a choice that would define the final chapter of her life. She could continue trying to resurrect her public image, or she could attempt something far more difficult. Retreating from the spotlight to rebuild herself as a private person rather than a public symbol. The decision to step back wasn't dramatic or well-publicized. Instead, it happened gradually, through declined interviews, canceled appearances, and withdrawn applications. Cassandra seemed to simply fade from public consciousness, which for someone who had lived in the spotlight felt like a form of death in itself. This period of retreat brought unexpected revelations. Away from cameras and obligations, she rediscovered interests that had been dormant for years. She returned to the beauty work that had originally drawn her to Los Angeles, finding satisfaction in helping other women feel confident and beautiful. There was something healing about using her skills in service of others rather than her own image. The work allowed her to reconnect with the artistic passion that had driven her original ambitions. Creating beauty for others reminded her of why she had fallen in love with transformation in the first place. These quiet moments provided a counterpoint to years of being transformed by others for public consumption. Yet even in retreat, Cassandra couldn't entirely escape the shadow of her Playboy past. Clients would sometimes recognize her, leading to awkward moments where she had to navigate between acknowledging her history and maintaining professional boundaries. The internet ensured that her images remained easily accessible, a permanent record of a time that increasingly felt like it had happened to someone else. Depression, which had been masked by the adrenaline of public attention, proved even more challenging to address in isolation. Without external validation to temporarily fill the void, Cassandra was forced to confront the full extent of her psychological wounds. The process was necessary but overwhelming. Financial pressures continued despite her attempts to build a stable career outside modeling. The beauty industry was competitive and poorly paid compared to the luxury she had briefly enjoyed. The practical realities of adult life provided constant reminders of how precarious her situation had become. Most troubling was her increasing reliance on prescription medications to manage both physical and emotional pain. What began as legitimate medical treatment gradually expanded into a more complex relationship with substances that promised relief, but delivered only temporary escape. Can anyone ever truly escape from the shadow of their darkest moments? For Cassandra, the answer seemed increasingly uncertain. Every attempt to move forward was complicated by the persistent presence of her past, and every step toward healing was met with new challenges that tested her already fragile resilience. The final years of Cassandra Lynn's life were marked by a mixture of acceptance and desperation. To those who encountered her during this period, she appeared to be a woman who had learned to carry her burdens with grace, even as those burdens continued to grow heavier. Her work in the beauty industry had evolved into something approaching a calling. Cassandra had developed a reputation among a loyal clientele for her exceptional skill and genuine care. She seemed to understand that for many women, being made beautiful was also a process of healing, and she approached her work with tenderness that spoke to her own wounds. One of her regular clients, Maria Santos, a middle-aged woman going through a difficult divorce, would later describe Cassandra's impact. "She didn't just do my makeup. She listened. She understood what it felt like to have the whole world looking at you and judging you. When I looked in the mirror after she finished, I saw someone strong enough to face whatever came next. These sessions often became informal therapy for both client and artist. Cassandra found herself serving as confidant, cheerleader, and artistic collaborator for women who were facing their own struggles with identity, self-worth, and public perception. The work provided her with a sense of purpose that had been missing since her retreat from the spotlight. Yet even this meaningful work couldn't entirely fill the void created by her years in the spotlight. There remained a restlessness, a sense that she was living a half-life that honored neither the woman she had been nor the woman she might have become. She spoke occasionally of plans to write a book about her experiences, but seemed unable to find a way to tell her story that felt both honest and hopeful. The book project consumed many of her quiet evenings in Rancho Mirage. Pages of handwritten notes and printed drafts accumulated on her desk, representing countless attempts to make sense of her journey from Mormon teenager to international sex symbol to struggling artist. But every draft seemed to fall into one of two traps: either a bitter condemnation of the industry that had used her, or a sanitized version that glossed over the real pain and complexity of her experience. The relationships in her life were characterized by intensity and impermanence. Cassandra seemed to attract people drawn to her combination of beauty and tragedy, but she struggled to maintain connections with anyone who couldn't understand the unique pressures she had faced. Her family connections, strained since her Playboy years, remained complicated and distant. While there had been some attempts at reconciliation, the gap between Cassandra's lived experience and her family's understanding proved difficult to bridge. Most concerning to those who cared about her was Cassandra's increasing dependence on prescription medications. What had begun as treatment for legitimate conditions had gradually expanded into a complex pattern of self-medication. The prescription drug problem was particularly insidious because it maintained a veneer of legitimacy that made intervention difficult. Despite these struggles, there were moments of genuine happiness in Cassandra's final years. She spoke of wanting to help other women facing similar challenges, and she occasionally volunteered with organizations supporting women leaving the adult entertainment industry. These activities seemed to provide her with a sense of purpose that had been missing. The move to Rancho Mirage represented what friends hoped might be a fresh start. The desert community offered a chance to live more quietly, away from constant reminders of her Hollywood past. Cassandra seemed optimistic about the change, speaking of plans to expand her beauty business and perhaps teach makeup artistry. Were these final decisions acts of surrender, or courageous acts of self-preservation? Those closest to Cassandra would debate this question long after her death. Her retreat from public life could be seen as healthy prioritizing of well-being over external validation, but her increasing isolation and medication dependence suggested a woman who was slowly disappearing even before she died. The January afternoon when Cassandra Lynn Hensley drew her final breath was unremarkable, except for the tragedy it contained. The discovery of her body sent shockwaves through the remaining Playboy community and the broader entertainment world. Here was a woman who had seemed to be rebuilding her life, who had appeared to be finding peace in her desert retirement. The friend whose house she was staying in, Jennifer Walsh, had known Cassandra for several years through their work in the beauty industry. Walsh had offered her guest room when Cassandra mentioned feeling anxious about staying alone in her own home. The two women had spent the previous evening watching movies and talking about Cassandra's plans to expand her client base, possibly even opening a small studio where she could teach makeup artistry to aspiring artists. The official investigation was thorough but raised more questions than answers. The coroner's report indicated accidental drowning with prescription drug intoxication as a contributing factor. The medications found in her system were all legally prescribed, but their combination had apparently created a dangerous situation that led to her losing consciousness while bathing. Detective Sarah Morrison, who led the investigation, noted several puzzling elements. Cassandra's phone showed no signs of distress calls or concerning messages. Her personal effects were neatly arranged, suggesting she had planned to continue her normal routine. The bathtub showed no signs of struggle, and the water temperature indicated she had been relaxing rather than attempting to harm herself. The toxicology report revealed a complex picture of a woman managing multiple forms of pain. Oxycodone for chronic back problems that had developed during her years of posing for photographs in uncomfortable positions. Lorazepam for anxiety that had become overwhelming during her transition away from public life. Zolpidem for insomnia that had plagued her since her retreat from the spotlight. Each medication had been prescribed by different doctors who may not have been fully aware of the other's treatments. Yet for many who knew Cassandra, the official explanation felt insufficient. Friends pointed out that she was experienced with the medications found in her system and had never previously shown signs of being incapacitated by them. The fact that she was alone at the time, in a friend's house rather than her own, added another layer of mystery. The media coverage was extensive but often sensationalized, focusing more on her Playboy past than on the complex human being she had been. Headlines emphasized her status as a former playmate, reducing her entire life to a single chapter that had ended years earlier. Perhaps most heartbreaking were the tributes from Cassandra's clients and friends in the beauty industry, who remembered her not as a sex symbol but as a talented artist and caring person who had helped them feel beautiful during difficult times. These remembrances painted a picture of a woman who had found meaning in service to others, even as she struggled with her own demons. The investigation revealed a troubling pattern of isolation and self-medication that had been building for years. Friends admitted they had been concerned about Cassandra's increasing reliance on prescription drugs, but they had felt powerless to intervene effectively. The stigma surrounding addiction and mental health had made it difficult to address the problems directly. The impact of Cassandra's death extended far beyond her immediate circle. For many women who had followed similar paths, her death served as a stark reminder of the long-term consequences of a system that consumes young women and provides little support for their transition back to private life. Was their death as straightforward as reported? Or were powerful hidden forces involved? While there was no evidence of foul play, the broader context of her life raised uncomfortable questions about the responsibility of industries that profit from women's bodies and images. Her death became a symbol of how society discards women once they are no longer useful as sexual objects. What hidden secrets might still remain untold about the woman behind the world's most famous centerfold? In Cassandra's case, the secrets were less about scandalous behavior than about the profound existential crisis that consumed her private life. The woman who had seemed to have everything had actually been struggling with fundamental questions about identity and purpose that success had complicated rather than resolved. The enduring mystery of Cassandra Lynn Hensley lies not in the glamour of her Playboy years, or even the tragedy of her death, but in the universal human themes her life embodied. Her struggle to maintain authenticity while living as a fantasy object. Her search for meaningful relationships in a world that valued her primarily for her appearance and her efforts to find purpose beyond the narrow roles society offered. These challenges resonate far beyond the adult entertainment industry. Today, more than a decade after her death, Cassandra remains a complex figure who defies simple categorization. She was neither purely victim nor purely victimizer, neither completely tragic nor completely triumphant. She was a woman who tried to navigate impossible circumstances with grace, who found moments of joy despite overwhelming obstacles, and who left the world too soon. Perhaps the most profound question Cassandra's life raises is this. In a culture that creates fantasies out of real women, who bears responsibility when those women can no longer carry the weight of other people's dreams? Was Cassandra Lynn Hensley a victim of the Playboy empire that made her famous? Or was she simply a casualty of her own choices in a society that offers women limited ways to achieve power and independence? If she had never stepped into that first photography studio, never transformed from Utah hairstylist to global icon, would she still be alive today? Or do the forces that destroyed her run deeper than any single industry, reaching into the very heart of how our culture views and consumes female beauty? Beauty, as Cassandra discovered, can be both blessing and curse, opening doors while simultaneously closing off possibilities, providing power while creating dependencies. Her life serves as a mirror in which we can examine our own complicity in a system that elevates certain women to goddess status only to abandon them when their usefulness expires. In remembering Cassandra Lynn Hensley, we honor not just a beautiful woman who died too young, but the possibility that future generations might treat women with the dignity, support, and genuine care that every human being deserves, regardless of how they choose to make their living or what images they create in pursuit of their dreams.